Muzan Kibutsuji, the so-called Demon King, the perfect being, the apex predator of his world. At least, that's what he told himself every night to sleep a little easier. But let's be honest, he wasn't a king, he wasn't a god. He was a scared little man, who spent 1,000 years running from a flower. 1,000 years, and this immortal being spent most of it looking over his shoulder, terrified that the sun might rise 5 minutes too early. Yes, I said it. Muzan Jackson was a clown with fangs. 1,000 years to build an empire. And all he managed was a haunted mansion, with mood lighting, trembling subordinates, and enough anxiety to keep every therapist in Japan employed for eternity. And let's not pretend he inspired fear because he was powerful. He inspired fear because he was unstable. Every demon under him wasn't loyal. They were praying they wouldn't be next. Muzan wasn't a king sitting on a throne. He was a ticking time bomb in a fancy hat. You call that a demon king? No, that's not a king. That's a man cosplaying Michael Jackson at midnight, moonwalking through hallways while panicking about tomorrow's sunrise. That's a god who looked at the universe and said, I'd like to be immortal, but only if I never have to go outside. And that's the real tragedy. He could have been unstoppable, but he chose to live as a prisoner of his own fear, chained by his own paranoia, undone by his own ego. Muzan Kibutsuji wasn't humanity's nightmare. He was just a very powerful coward. With good fashion sense, Muzan had 1,000 years. 1,000 years to create the perfect world. Do you understand what that means? Empires rise and fall in a fraction of that time. Men have rewritten history, conquered continents, invented entire civilizations in less than a century. And Muzan? He spent that millennium playing hide-and-seek with his own shadow. He hid in mansions, changed hairstyles more times than he changed strategies, murdered his own soldiers for breathing too loudly, and lived every single day in mortal terror of a plant. Imagine having eternity in your hands, and still living like a paranoid fugitive. Every second of his existence was a performance of control, while inside, he was screaming. He wasn't a king. He was a coward with a crown. He didn't rule the night. He ran from the day. 1,000 years, and not a single plan that could outsmart a flower. This is not the behavior of a genius mastermind. This is the tantrum of a spoiled child handed godlike power too early. He wanted to rule humanity, yet he couldn't even rule his own temper. Every decision he made was reactionary, not visionary. Every order he gave was fueled by fear, not strategy. 1,000 years of immortality, and he learned nothing but how to throw a better tantrum. You don't see a king here. You see a child smashing his toys because they didn't obey him fast enough. Muzan didn't build a legacy. He built a graveyard of his own mistakes and buried every demon he ever created in it. And somehow, he still thought he was untouchable. A real mastermind would have shaped the world quietly, patiently, until victory was inevitable. Muzan. He screamed, he panicked, he lashed out. 1,000 years old and still behaving like a brat denied dessert. Every time someone disobeyed him, he killed them. Not because it was smart, but because it made him feel better. But let me tell you something. A king who must kill to be obeyed is no king at all. A true king inspires loyalty. Muzan inspired fear. And fear is fragile. It shatters the moment the tyrant shows weakness. That's why the instant Muzan bled, his loyal army didn't rise for him. They crumbled without him. A true visionary builds an empire that outlives him. Muzan built a daycare full of broken demons, terrified children waiting for his next tantrum. Their existence was not devotion, it was survival. They didn't follow him because they believed. They followed him because they were too afraid to run. And here is the cruel irony. The more Muzan killed his subordinates, the fewer pieces he had left to play his 1,000-year game. A king who devours his own pawns is not a strategist. He is a fool who mistakes fear for strength. That is why Muzan never commanded respect. He was not a king of demons. He was a babysitter of hostages. And after 1,000 years of planning, this man still got outsmarted by a group of exhausted teenagers with swords. Think about that for a second. A millennium of running, scheming, hiding, killing, and the end result? Not a kingdom, not a throne, not a world ruled by demons, but a final boss fight where he had to beg his own bloodstream to keep him alive. He wasn't defeated by strategy, he was defeated by time. All that power, and he still couldn't buy himself a single sunrise. Pathetic. No, worse than pathetic. He is living proof that fear will rot even the strongest predator until it becomes prey. Muzan wasn't killed by the demon slayer call. He was killed by his own cowardice. A death 1,000 years in the making. And the funniest part? Muzan spent centuries running from death, only to die crying about how unfair life was. This man feared nothing except the Sunday. Think about that. The so-called apex predator, the king of an entire species, reduced to living life like a paranoid meteorologist. Every morning, Muzan's greatest battle wasn't with the demon slayer call. It was with the weather report. He wakes up like partly cloudy with a chance of my extinction. He had 1,000 years. 1,000 years to rewrite history, conquer humanity, become a god. And what was his biggest enemy? Daylight savings time. Imagine plotting world domination, only to be defeated by a shift in the clock and a sunrise you didn't account for. Sunny tomorrow, high chance of Muzan barbecue. This isn't a demon king. This is a vampire who forgot sunscreen and then blamed society for the sunburn. At some point, you stop being terrifying and just start being a walking meme. Muzan's true final form wasn't some demon god ascending to power. It was a man screaming at the sky, begging for cloud cover like it's going to save him. The great conqueror of humanity turned into a glorified weather app notification. Tell me, does that sound like the ultimate villain or the ultimate punchline? Because in the end, Muzan Kibutsuji didn't lose to Tanjiro. He lost to the most predictable thing in existence, tomorrow's sunrise. Muzan Kibutsuji is proof of one thing. Power without purpose is nothing. You can be immortal, unstoppable, a god among men, and still die like a fool if your life is spent running from fear. Because fear turns kings into slaves. It makes gods hide like insects, waiting for the dawn to pass so they can crawl out again. Muzan had everything. Strength beyond comprehension, time without end, and still lived like a fugitive in his own world. And what was the result of his 1,000-year reign? Not a kingdom, not a legacy, just a graveyard of his own mistakes and a memory that future generations will laugh at. Understand this. Power is not measured by how many you can kill, but by how much of the world bends to your will and stays that way after you are gone. Muzan killed plenty, and yet nothing changed. The world moved on the moment he turned to dust. That is the ultimate failure, to live forever, and still leave nothing behind but fear that dies with you. And that is why Muzan will never be remembered as a king, only as a warning. Strength means nothing without vision. You can stack infinite power, crush nations beneath your heel, erase anyone who defies you, but without a purpose greater than your ego, you are nothing more than a loud child throwing tantrums in eternity. Muzan Jackson will forever be remembered, not as the king of demons, not as a god, not even as a true villain, but as history's longest-running punchline. He had immortality, and still died begging for more time. He had an army, and still fought alone in fear. He had 1,000 years, and still learned nothing. That is Muzan's true legacy. Proof that you can have everything, and still be the dumbest man to ever live.